Hello and welcome to Master of NAND. This is How to Analyze Training Data, Episode 4, or Part 4, if you will. So today we're going to be talking about how to actually analyze data. So before we get started in Jupyter Notebook, I've got SQL Server Management Studio pulled up here. I'm running version 17.9 to show you how to provision a database, import files, and then export the file that we need to be able to do some aggregation and descriptive statistics on it. So first things first, we're going to come over to our Object Explorer over here. I'm going to right-click on Databases, click New Database. Let's pull that puppy over here. So you're going to want to give your database an obvious name. In this case, I'm just going to call it Horizon, since that's the name of our fake company. Then we're just going to click OK, because all of the other options don't really matter for the purposes of this video. So hit OK, give it a second, and then over here on the left, you'll see we have Horizon. Yay! So if we expand that, then we've got all of our basic components here, but no tables. So we're going to add some tables. So in order to do that, you need to right-click on the database again, go to Tasks. This is kind of dark, I apologize. We'll go down to Import Flat File, because that's what we created earlier. So I've already done that, so I'm just going to pop it up here so you can see in the window. So this is the flat file import tool. In my opinion, by far the best way to import flat file data into SQL. So let's click Next. We're going to browse to our file. So I browse to the All Employees file. That'll be our first table that we pop in. And I'm just going to change the table name to Employees because we don't really need it to say All Employees because that's implied. Hit Next. It's going to give us a nice preview of the data. This looks beautiful so far. So look how it automatically parsed it according to our tab delimited data. We don't even have to specify what form of parsing we need because it automatically does that. Okay, so now we get into the types of data. So you see that it's auto formatted here to the variable character, the end variable character, with a length of 50 for each one. We're just gonna make sure that we don't cut anybody off and change this to nvarchar max for all. Actually, except for this, the sex is just M or F. So in this case, we can actually reduce it. And we will, so in case we want to change it later, we'll just change it to nvarchar 10. And then we'll leave the employee ID as an integer because we know that it's all integers. And then we're going to annotate this as the primary key right here. So by clicking primary key, and over here, we're not going to allow any nulls because we want everybody to have a last name, a first name, and a sex when they have their EID. So just in case we add anybody to the database later. So hit Next. It's going to say, hey, I'm going to import this stuff. I'm going to hit Finish. And then you should have two green icons right here that tell you that everything was fine. If that doesn't happen, you're going to have to Google what's happening, but chances are your input file was messed up in some way, or you had an issue with the nvarchar, like it cut somebody off or something, you could choose the wrong one. That's typically what happens when the operation fails to import data successfully. So I'm going to hit Close. Okay, I'm going to right-click and refresh my database, and now when I expand the tables thing, down here at the very bottom, we got a little DBO employees. So I'm going to open a new query window here, and we're going to make this much bigger so you guys can see what's happening. Actually, that's probably too big, so let's go with 150. 150. There we go. Okay, so here we are at 150, and we're just going to select. All right, so you know that feeling when you're talking to yourself and then you realize that nobody else is listening? Well, that just happened because I paused myself. So just to catch up, if we haven't already done this, right click on the database over here, refresh, go down to tables. So you can see that we have an employees table here, and then open a new query window by clicking the new query button up top or hitting Control N, and then type in select star from employees, and then you'll see all of your employees here. And we don't really care that the EID is in the last column. It's kind of arbitrary which column it's in. If we want to make it look prettier or more database-like, we could always write a query that puts it at the beginning here. So we can do that a little later. But for now, here's our employees table. So now we want to import two other tables. And that's our course definitions and course history tables. So just repeat the steps from the previous table that we just went through, and then continue to follow along with me. So I'm going to do that right now. One thing before you import the course history data, make sure you don't click primary key for any of these things, for course ID or EID, because there are duplicates in the course ID and in the EID, so we don't want to have a primary key there. This is just kind of like a blob table where there's a glut of information. It's all related to itself, but there's no primary key for each instance. Now we could create one, or we can just use the auto-generated one that SQL gives us. So we're just going to do that. And I'm going to refresh here. Go back down to my tables. Now voila, I've got 3 tables. So I'm just going to check the tables really quick. We've already checked employees. Now we're going to check course history. See how it auto-populates there. I did go up and I went to edit and down to IntelliSense and then refresh local cache. If it's not auto-populating in your query window, that's kind of what you want to do. So I'm actually going to minimize my window over here, or actually I'm going to make it go away because I don't really need it. So I'm going to hit this one. There we go. So we see that we chose the date time for the date here. And what we'll want to do before we export this is actually change this back into date. So stay tuned for that. Okay, moving on, we're going to check our third table here. So course definitions, and we will execute. For some reason, my function button is not working today, so we manually do that. And we can see we've got 7 rows here, various names, various course IDs, course lengths. Beautiful. Okay, so now we need to construct our query that's going to pull everything together. My preferred way to do this is with common table expressions, or CTEs. So for the first one, and really actually we don't need to do this that much, but for the sake of argument. All right, so we're having some technical difficulties today, but I'm going to create a common table expression up here with the employee. I'm going to select star from employees, and then we're going to select. I had to unstick my hotkeys there. So now that I fixed that issue, you can see that we have our common table expression up here, and then we have our employees. So now we got to figure out how we want to actually organize this. So we want our employee table to be the left table. So I'm going to actually be explicit here. I'm going to say I want EID first, and then I want last name, then I want first name, then I want sex, and that's going to be, I'll actually take this up here and put this in the CTE so we don't have to mess with it anymore. And then I'm going to leave this here as well. And I'm going to alias this table here as E, just to make it even more succinct, because now we're going to pull in the other 2 tables. Okay, it's an early morning. I haven't had my coffee yet. I apologize. Let's rewind just a smidge. We're going to keep our CTE with our employee data up here, and then we're going to pull from the course history because we actually want that as our largest table we're going to be looking at our course history data. So ch is how we're going to alias it, so we don't have to write course history every time because that's silly. And then we also want, see when I put the dot there, it auto fills that. We also want the course ID. Then we want the course date. And remember what I said about that being a date time? We're going to actually convert that to a date. And then we're going to re-alias it as course date there. So that will handle that portion. But now we've got another issue because we actually want to put in the course info, like the hours and the name. So we're going to left join course definitions, or CD, on the course ID equals ch course ID, okay, which will give us some lovely course names here from that. And then we also want the course length, which we will alias as course hours. That way we've got it there. So we're good so far. So now we want to add the personnel data in here. So everything from employee. So we got to come back down here again, and we need to, oops, elf join, which is kind of like left join. Left join emp preface it with E on E EID equals ch EID. Okay. And then we'll just take this information, last name, first name, sex, and dump it down here. And now we don't have to put the alias in, but it is kind of good practice, especially if you're dealing with multiple tables. You just kind of put it in there just for the sake of argument's sake. So if you recall, our course history tab had something like 11,000 rows. So we should have that when we execute this bad boy. There we go, 11,540. So let's kind of just do a quick sanity check. Looking over here, we've got the EID, got our course ID, our course name, our course hours, our course date. You can see the timestamp is gone. And then our last name, first name, and sex. So this is actually everything we want, everything we need. And now we're going to export this in the easiest way possible. So before we move on, I've gone up to Tools and hit Options, and gone down to Query Results, and I've specified that I want my output in tab delimited format. So I'm just going to hit OK there. So now when I come through here, I'm going to right-click down here on this little corner here, save results as, and we'll save it as tab delimited just to make sure. And I'll save it somewhere here. Okay, so I save the file as Horizon All, and then see I've got it open here in VS Code, and it looks like everything is good and tab delimited. So we'll close that, and then we'll close that. There you go. So now we're good. So now we've provisioned our database, and before we leave, I like this view, so let's just save this as a view. So go up to the top, do create view. I called it all info as that, execute, and looks like we're successful. So I'm going to open my Object Explorer again, if I can find the darn thing. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to refresh over here, refresh, go down to views. Now here, you see the all info. So I'm actually going to close this window. No, I don't want to save it. I'm going to right click, script view as, create to, new query window editor. And then we can see all the code we just typed in. So this will include any comments that you make as well. And then if you want to run it, all you have to do, let's close that, hit new query, close that. We'll say select star from all info. So this will be a persistent view that, oh, yes, I want this from, we're going to execute. There we go. And this gives us all our info. So if we change the underlying tables, as long as we don't change the table name or the column name, if we just add info or take away info, this will pull the information that we need from here on out. All right, moving over to Jupyter Notebook here, we're going to import OS, import NumPy as NP, et cetera, all our standard imports. Then we're going to actually import the data. So let's make a variable for employees here. Okay, so I've made our 3 tables, if you will, here. We're going to import everything. There we go. So we see our employee length, 2006-8, course history as before, 11,540, and then our course definitions at 7. And all these are now pandas data frames. So if we just type in CD like that, here we've got our lovely deal. Uh-oh, there's some import issues. All right, just added the separator there to make it not all one string. Again, I don't know what my excuse is. I had plenty of sleep last night, but I apologize. Just check everything. All right, so everything looks good. All right, so the next step is to systematically merge all of these tables together. So again, our left table is going to be course history, or CH right here, CH variable. And then our right table is going to be the course definitions. We're going to do a left join, so that's how equals left. And then we're going to specify the primary key on which we'll be doing the join, which is a course ID for both of these tables. And then I've printed out the length of all info just to demonstrate that we're the same as course history, so that's good. And just take a peek at the header here to make sure everything looks good. And then we're just going to do the exact same thing for the employee table. All right, so I've taken all info, I have merged it recursively with itself and employees. Again, a left join on the employee ID this time. And then I printed out the length, see the length is good. And then the header is also good. So we've got our same course name, course length, etc. And then we've also got our last name, first name, sex. So this file should be identical to the other one that we turned out. We didn't really have to do anything else. And you can see how much less work that took than doing it in SQL. Now, again, the benefits of SQL is that if you are running a SQL database and you need it, or if that's what you're working with, period, you can do a lot with SQL. However, for analysis, I personally prefer Python because to me it's quicker and it is more powerful since it is a fully fledged object-oriented programming language. All right, so now that we've done everything the hard way, since we already did it in SQL, let's just import the file and see what's what. Okay, we see that we're good now. We've got all of our header names, we've got all of our columns, and now we're ready to do analysis. So the first thing we'll do is just do some descriptive statistics on specific columns to see what we can see about what's going on. So the most obvious one would be course hours. What's our mean? Looks like it's 2.58. Now granted, we in episode 3 limited the course deviation between 1 and 4 hours. So we know that the minimum is going to be 1, the maximum is going to be 4. Obviously, this won't be the case in the real world. You're going to have a lot of variation, especially if you have a system that allows human input versus just automatic input from, say, like computer-based training. So the next thing I'm going to look at is I'm going to do a frequency count for all of the employee IDs to see how many courses they've taken. So what I've done here is I have limited the data set to just the employee ID and the course ID, use the groupby method, grouped on employee ID, and then use the count method of the groupby method to do a frequency count. So now I've got all these great frequency counts over here. I can actually rename this. We'll just call it course count. And then we'll come beneath here and we will describe the course count. Boom. Okay, so now you can see here very clearly the mean number of courses that everyone has taken per employee is 5.5. However, the standard deviation is 2.8, so fairly big standard deviation. You'll notice too that the total count is 2,068, which just happens to be the total number of employees that we have. Now, this will also not be the case in the real world if you have employees who have not taken any training, or if you're only looking at a specific training subset, as we will in future videos. All right, so using that same principle from before, I've taken the employee ID and then the course hours column, and I've grouped by employee ID, and then I use the sum function to just sum everything. So then we can see what is the total number of hours for each employee. That's why I call it hours per employee up here, which is good. So say that there is a threshold, like you must have 10 hours per year or something like that. Here's how you can go in and assess. Okay, I see employee 5117 here only has 6 hours. Whoops. Or let's say you have a shortfall in something like a certain specific compliance training and you want to rectify that. You can go through and filter for those employees who have not met that threshold. With that, we're going to call it for this week, and then next week we're going to get into some data engineering so that we can kind of make the data more granular, do a little bit more descriptive statistics, and then do some more advanced analysis on this data set. Thanks for watching. This has been Master Dan.